Hello students, today we will discuss about the transverse section of the pons. You know that there are two sections at two different levels of the pons. So today we will discuss how to draw these sections and what are the important features related to these sections. So before that you should have the idea about the external appearance of the pons, because whenever you are drawing the outline of the pons, this knowledge is always helpful to us. So dear students, you have to first understand that pons is anterior to the cerebellum and it connects the medulla oblongata to the midbrain. So you know that midbrain is having the three part from above downward. It is midbrain, then it is pons, and this is medulla oblongata. So our brain stem is having the three part. So this middle portion, this pons, is connecting the midbrain above and medulla in the lower part. And if you will see the pons, it is around 1 inch long. So in this view, this is the anterior surface where you can see that this is the upper margin of the pons and this is the lower margin of the pons, and this distance is around 1 inch. Now the pons literal means is bridge. Now this is a bridge between the right and left half of the cerebellar hemisphere. So this is the one cerebellar hemisphere, this is the another cerebellar hemisphere, and both these hemispheres are connected to each other by a bridge, and this bridge is known as pons. Clear? Now the important concept about the external feature while drawing the section is that the anterior surface is convex from side to side, and it shows the transverse fibers that converge on the each side and they will form the middle cerebellar peduncle. So what is the meaning that if you will see the surface of your pons is having the convexity on both the sides. Now this is the convexity, and you know that whenever you are having the pons in your hand in dissection hall, you will realize that there are multiple fibers are present on this external surface of the pons. Now these fibers are known as transverse fibers, and these transverse fibers are going towards the cerebellum, and this is known as middle cerebellar peduncle. Clear? So this is the one thing that whenever you are having the external surface of the pons, it shows the convexities from midline in both the areas. The another important thing is that its anterior surface is having a shallow groove in midline, and that groove is known as basilar groove. So where is the basilar groove? Now this is the basilar groove. Clear? So it means that if I am taking a section of the pons, first in the center I have to draw the basilar groove. So this is the basilar groove, and on the sides of the basilar groove I will draw the two convexities which are here. Clear? So this is the outline of the anterior surface of the pons, and this anterior surface of the pons is having a midline depression is the basilar groove, and on the sides you are having the convexities. Clear? Now this image is showing that what is the basilar groove. Now the basilar groove is a groove which is occupied by a artery. Now this artery is known as basilar artery. Clear? So this question has been asked so many times that which part of the brain stem comes in contact with the basilar artery. So answer is anterior surface of the pons, where you will have the groove for basilar artery. Now in this video clip you can see the overall orientation of the brain stem. Now you know that brain stem is having three part here from above downward: midbrain, pons, and medulla. Now this pons is connecting the upper midbrain to the lower medulla, and by side you can see that these are the transverse fibers, and these transverse fibers are entering into the cerebellum to form the middle cerebellar peduncle. So my dear students, whenever you are having the section of the pons, you should keep this thing in mind that the anterior surface of pons is not smooth, but it is showing the both side convexities. Clear? So on the anterolateral surface, when you will have the pons in your hand, you will find the exit of a one large nerve, and that is known as trigeminal nerve. So here in this image you can see the trigeminal nerve. Now this trigeminal nerve is coming out with the help of two parts. Now this medial part is known as motor root of the trigeminal nerve, and this larger one is the sensory part of the trigeminal nerve. The each part or the each root consists of the two parts. As I already told you, motor root lies medially and lateral root is the sensory root, which is larger. Now in the groove between the pons and medulla oblongata, you are having the exit of cranial nerve. Now this question is a very important viva question for your exam, that this is the pontomedullary junction. Clear? Now this is the upper part of the medulla and this is the lower part of pons. So what is now? It is known as pontomedullary junction. Now at this pontomedullary junction you are having the exit of three cranial nerves. What are the three cranial nerves? 6th abducent, 7th facial and 8th vestibulocochlear. So the sequence is from medial to lateral. So here this is your 6th, here this is your 7th and this is your 8th cranial nerve. So my dear students, this question is very commonly asked in your exam, that which cranial nerves come out from pontomedullary junction? Answer is 6th, 7th and 8th cranial nerve. Now what is the exit of 5th cranial nerve? Answer is this anterior surface, or you can say anterolateral surface of the pons. Now when you will have the posterior part of the brainstem. Now on the posterior side of the brainstem, you know that we have the cerebellum, which has been connected with the brainstem with the help of superior, middle and inferior cerebellar peduncles. Now when you will remove the cerebellum from the posterior side, you are able to see a rhomboid shape area. Now this rhomboid shape area is known as fourth ventricle. Now you know that this fourth ventricle is filled with the cerebrospinal fluid or CSF. So my dear students, when you will have the posterior area or the posterior part of the brainstem, you have to remove the cerebellum, because what will happen, the pons is hidden from posterior side by this part of the brain. Now in the upper, it forms the upper half of the floor of the fourth ventricle. Now what is the total formation? Now if you will see this rhomboid area is completely formed from upper part by the pons and in lower part by the medulla oblongata. Now you know that this upper part is of the fourth ventricle basically present in the lower half of the posterior surface of the pons. Now the posterior surface of the fourth ventricle is divided symmetrically into the two halves by median sulcus. So where is the median sulcus? Now if you will see the fourth ventricle, you will find that there is a line in midline and this is known as median sulcus. Now lateral to the median sulcus, you will have one projection area. Now this projection area is known as median eminence. This is known as median eminence. And lateral to the median eminence, you will have one more groove, and that is known as sulcus limitans. What is that? Sulcus limitans. And this median eminence, you can say, is bounded towards the midline by a median sulcus and laterally by the sulcus limitans. So why we are discussing this part here? Because when you are drawing the section of the pons, you should have a basic idea about the floor of fourth ventricle, which we are going to draw into your section of the pons. So you have first this basic idea that when you are taking the section, suppose I am taking the section lower and upper part of the pons, in both the sections you will find the floor of fourth ventricle. But the important thing is that the area is more broader into the lower section as compared to the upper section of the pons. Now there is one very important feature is seen in the floor of fourth ventricle. Now here you can see that this projection, which is present in both the sides in lower part of the pons, is known as facial colliculus. So facial colliculus is a very prominent feature in the floor of fourth ventricle, which is actually the feature of the pons. Now which part of the pons? Lower part of the pons. So when we are taking the section at the lower part of the pons, your section is passing through this prominent area, that is facial colliculus, which is a kind of globular projection in the floor of fourth ventricle. Now there is one more area, and this area next to this sulcus is known as vestibular area. So when you are drawing the section, you will find most laterally the nuclei of your vestibulocochlear nerve. So now dear students, in this video clip you can see the relation of the fourth ventricle with the brainstem. Now this is your brainstem, which is having midbrain, pons and medulla. Posteriorly you will have the cerebellum. Now this side we have take the sagittal section of the brainstem. Now once you have removed the one half of the brainstem, now you can see that this is your aqueduct. Now this aqueduct of Sylvius passing through the midbrain, and it is approaching to an area which is lies behind the pons and medulla, but in front of the cerebellum. Now this area is known as fourth ventricle. So this fourth ventricle is bounded posteriorly by the cerebellum, anteriorly by the lower part of the pons and upper part of the medulla oblongata. So we are actually taking the section in these areas, where you will find that if I will take the section here, you will have the broader fourth ventricle, and if you will take the section in upper area, the fourth ventricle is comparatively narrower. So let's start to draw the sections. So first is you have to draw the outlines of the pons. Now here you can see that these are the two images which has been given in your book. So the first thing is you have to draw the anterior part, where you have to draw the groove for the basilar artery, and on both the side you have to draw this area which is convex on both the side. So in both these images you can see that there is a presence of this basilar groove, and on both the side you can see that there is a presence of your convexities. Clear? Now the second thing is that when you are comparing these two images, you can very well see that the globular projection, which I told you is facial colliculus, is a feature of the lower part of the pons. So here on the posterior side you can see that this prominence is there. Now this prominence we have to draw in case of the lower pons, while that kind of the prominence is not there. And the another thing is that you can see the floor of fourth ventricle is open in this section. So this is a lower pons. In the upper pons you can see that the section is showing a narrow fourth ventricle, and it is closed by a layer of the superior medullary velum. So my dear students, when you are drawing the section, first you should have the basic idea about the outline of the section. Now what you have to draw in the inside these sections. So my dear students, you should have the basic idea that we divide the pons into the two parts. One is known as Stagmantum. Now Stagmantum is the posterior area of the pons, and basilar part, which is the anterior area of the pons. Clear? Now this basilar part is larger in nature, and it is traversed by transversely running fibers. Now the structure of these pons studied, I told you, at the two level. One is the lower level. Lower level is known as level at the facial colliculus, and second thing is the upper level, which is also known as at the level of trigeminal nuclei. Clear? So we will discuss both these sections one by one. First we will discuss the lower section, and then we will discuss the upper section. Now my dear students, when we are drawing the sections, you have to keep in mind that basilar part, that means this area of both the sections are almost similar. Now in these areas you will find the three basic things. What are these three basic things? First is the longitudinal bundles. Now you know that we have the pyramidal tract. Now I will show you the pyramidal tract. Now these pyramidal tracts are present vertically, and these vertical fibers which are passing through the crus cerebri of your midbrain is approaching to your this pons. Now when they are approaching the pons, they divided into the small bundles. So you are drawing these vertical fibers, and these vertical fibers are represented by the circles. Why circles? because this is a vertical fiber, and if I will take a cross section, and if you will see from the front, but obviously you will have a circular outline. So these circular outlines are nothing but these are the longitudinal bundles, and these longitudinal bundles are the pyramidal tract. So you can see that in basilar part you have both sections are having these circles. So these are the longitudinal fibers. Now apart from that, second thing you will have the transverse fiber. Now transverse fibers are here. Now these transverse fibers are the feature of the basilar part, and these are present in both the sections. And third thing is the pontine nuclei. Now here you can see the small dots. Now these black dots are representing the pontine nuclei. So first you have to draw the basilar part. In the basilar part you have to draw the three things: multiple circles, and these multiple circles are showing the longitudinal fibers which are going downwards into the medulla. Second, in between these multiple circles you have to draw the black dots which are representing the pontine nuclei, plus you have to draw the horizontal black lines which are representing your transverse fibers. Now if we will see the other part, that means the posterior part, which is known as stagmantum. This stagmantum composed of two basic things. You will find the fibers plus you will find the nuclei. Now the fibers are ascending and descending tract other than the pyramidal tract. Plus you will find a very important thing which is known as trapezoid body. Now my dear students, this trapezoid body is a characteristic feature of the section of Pons. You will not find this trapezoid body in the sections of midbrain and medulla. Now in the sections of the Pons, if you will see the lower Pons, trapezoid body is more pronounced feature. So this is a lower part of the Pons, and you can see that you have drawn a area where you will have multiple fibers which are crisscross pattern. Now these crisscross pattern is actually the fibers which arises from the cochlear nuclei and the nuclei of this trapezoid body itself. Now this trapezoid body is a more pronounced feature of the lower part of the Pons, that means at the level of facial colliculus. When you will approach in the upper Pons, the trapezoid body is very smaller in size, or some books may not show the trapezoid body. So trapezoid body is a collection of nuclei and fibers, and this is a part of auditory pathway. So trapezoid body is showing the crisscross pattern of the fibers, and trapezoid body is present in this anterior part of tegmentum, and it is a prominent feature of your section of the Pons at the level of facial colliculus. Now apart from these two things, you are also going to see the nuclei. Now which cranial nerve nuclei? The nuclei of trigeminal, abducent, facial and vestibulocochlear. Now my dear students, if you remember my earlier classes of the brainstem, I already told you that your medulla is related with the lower four cranial nerves, that means 9, 10, 11, 12. And your Pons is related with the next four, that means 5, 6, 7, 8. So you will find the cranial nerves of the 5, 6, 7, 8. And here I will tell you one thing, that this trigeminal nerve is having the four nuclei. And these four nuclei are known as motor nucleus, mesencephalic nucleus, chief sensory or principal sensory nucleus, and spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Now my dear students, now this trigeminal nucleus which is having the four nuclei, the spinal nucleus is present in the lower part of the Pons and the whole length of medulla. But its remaining nuclei, that means the chief sensory nucleus and your motor nucleus, they are present only at the level of upper part of the Pons. So you will not find its two basic nuclei, that means principal sensory nuclei and motor nucleus in the lower Pons. They are the feature of upper Pons. So the structure of the tegmentums are different into both the sections of your Pons. Now transverse section, when you are drawing through the lower Pons, what is the first thing which you have to draw? So I told you that first we have drawn this outer section, Now in this outer section, I draw the multiple circles. Now these circles are representing my longitudinal fibers. In the middle, I have already mentioned that these are the Pontine nuclei. From the Pontine nuclei, you will have the multiple origin of the transverse fibers. Clear? Now we have reached up to this part. Now here I am going to draw one very broad area. Now this is your trapezoid body, and in this trapezoid body you will have the crisscross form of the fibers. So till this you can see that we have reached up to the from anterior to posterior side. So you have to keep this thing in mind that first you have to draw the basilar part, and once you will finish with the basilar part, immediately behind that you have to draw a large trapezoid body in case of the lower section of the pons. Now just above this, now you have to draw the lemnisci. Now which lemnisci? Medial lemniscus. Now if you have the idea about the section of medulla at upper part of the medulla. Now in upper medulla, you have the medial lemniscus which starts from the sensory decussation. Now at that sensory decussation, it is longitudinally arranged, but here it is horizontally arranged. That means the fibers rotates. So this is important to understand that medial lemniscus rotates as it ascend, and it ascend from medulla to pons. Now it is situated in the anterior part of the tegmentum along the axis running transversely. So it is a transversely arranged area now, and the medial lemniscus accompanied by the spinal lemniscus. So this is again the question of your exam, that which lemnisci are present in the pons at the level of facial colliculus. So in this image you have to draw two lemniscus. One is the medial lemniscus and second is spinal lemniscus. Clear? So again I am explaining this, that you have draw this base. Now where you will have the anterior area, you will have the multiple sections of your longitudinal fibers. In between you will have the pontine nuclei where you will have the transverse fibers. Then you will have the trapezoid body which you have drawn here. Now in this trapezoid body you will have the crisscross of the fibers, and just anterior to this, the posterior to this, you have to draw here the medial lemniscus and the spinal lemniscus. So now this thing has to be very clear that when we are drawing the section of the your lower pons, first you have to finish the basilar part, and when you will start to draw the structures in the tegmental area, we first show the trapezoid body, then the two lemnisci, medial and spinal lemnisci. Now after that we will go on the posterior side. Now on the posterior side you have to draw this outline, and I have already told you that what is the meaning of this prominence. This prominence is known as facial colliculus. Clear? So this facial colliculus is the most important and prominent feature of the section of your pons. So the facial nuclei lies posterior to the lateral part of medial lemniscus. So this is the medial lemniscus. This is the lateral part of medial lemniscus. Just above that you will find the facial nuclei. Now this facial nuclei is actually showing the fibers which are making a loop. Now this loop is around the nucleus of sixth cranial nerve, that is abducent. So what is happening actually, that this is the nuclei of sixth cranial nerve, and the fibers of your facial nerve are making a loop, and this loop is arising from this nuclei. Clear? So what is this nuclei? This is the nuclei of seventh, and this is the nuclei of sixth. So the fibers of the seventh cranial nerve, which arises from this nucleus of the seventh, which is a motor nucleus, making a loop around the abducent nerve. Now this loop is known as internal genu. This loop is known as internal genu of facial nerve, and this internal genu is responsible for the surface projection, which is known as facial colliculus. So this question has been asked so many times in image based question also, that what is this prominent area? Answer is facial colliculus. And what is the reason of facial colliculus? Answer is, It is due to the internal genu of the motor fibers of facial nerve. Now, what is this process is known as? This formation of the loop by the motor fibers is known as neurobiotaxis. So, this is again very important question. What is the example of neurobiotaxis? So, the example of neurobiotaxis is migration of the fiber or the motor nuclei of seventh nerve, and this migration occur in such a way that it make a loop around the abducent nerve. And when you will see the position of this motor nucleus, it comes very near to this spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Then you have to draw the vestibular and cochlear nuclei. I just told you in the section of your fourth ventricle image that when you are having this fourth ventricle image, which is a rhomboid shape, we have drawn this median sulcus, and here in this lateral most area, I told you that this lateral most area of the fourth ventricle is known as vestibular area. So, but obviously when you are taking the section, you have to draw the vestibular area most laterally. So, in this section, you are having the cochlear nuclei here and vestibular nuclei here. So, you have to keep this thing in mind that vestibulocochlear areas are most laterally placed in the floor of fourth ventricle. So, when you are drawing the floor, first in the midline, you have to draw the facial colliculus, and lateral to that, when you will go, you have to draw the vestibular nuclei, and lateral to that cochlear nuclei. Clear? One more important thing which you have to keep in mind, that these transverse fibers are going to form your middle cerebellar peduncle. It is a middle cerebellar peduncle, and in the lower pons, behind the middle, you will find inferior cerebellar peduncle. This part is the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and cochlear nuclei present on anterior and posterior aspect of this inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now, apart from that, what you have to draw? You have to draw the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve with its tract. So, where is the position of the spinal nucleus? I told you that this motor nucleus of facial nerve migrates from its origin position, and it will reach here, so that the fibers are making a loop, and just next to that you will have the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve, which comes anteromedial to this inferior cerebellar peduncle. So, what is the position of spinal nucleus? Spinal nucleus is just adjacent to this motor nucleus of facial nerve. So, this is the motor nucleus of facial, this is spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Clear? Then we will draw the medial longitudinal fasciculus. So, these are the structures which are present in the midline. So, this is medial longitudinal fasciculus. Then we will draw the tactospinal and rubrospinal tracts. Clear? So, my dear students, when you are drawing the tactum part of this section, what you have to keep in mind that posteriorly the first thing is the facial colliculus. Next to the facial colliculus, you will have the vestibular area. So, here you have to draw the internal genu. Once you are drawing this loop, this end is having the motor nucleus, and deep to the loop, you will have the sixth cranial nerve or abducent nerve nucleus. Lateral to the facial colliculus, you have to draw the vestibulocochlear area. So, first you have to draw the vestibular nuclei and the cochlear nuclei. Once you are drawing the cochlear nuclei, you have to draw the two cochlear nuclei on the both side of inferior cerebellar peduncle. So, you have to draw this inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now, between the inferior cerebellar peduncle and this facial motor nucleus, you have to draw one more nuclei, and this nuclei is the spinal nuclei of trigeminal nerve. Clear? In this anterior part, once you have finished the basilar area, you have to draw the trapezoid body, and just above the trapezoid body, we are going to form the two lemnisci. One is the trigeminal lemnisci, and next to that is the spinal lemnisci. And in midline from posterior to anterior, you have to draw medial longitudinal fasciculus, tactospinal and rubrospinal fibers. Now, in basilar part, I already told you that you will have the pontine nuclei. So, these pontine nuclei are the black dots which are present in basilar part, and these pontine nuclei are the small masses of the neurons. Clear? and the corticopontine fibers terminate in the pontine nucleus. So what is corticopontine? The fibers which are coming from the cerebral cortex, and these pontine nuclei give rise to the transverse fibers. So these transverse fibers are nothing but these are the axons of these pontine nuclei. Now what is happening due to the presence of these transverse fibers? You have to understand that these transverse fibers actually not going to the same side. These fibers are going to the opposite side. So these right pontine nuclei fibers will go to the left, and left pontine nuclei will go to the right. So when they are passing through this basilar part, they are actually passing between the fibers of your longitudinal tracts. So when the horizontal fibers are passing between the fibers of longitudinal tracts, because of this reason, what will happen? That they will break the longitudinal fibers into the small bundles. So that you can appreciate in this image that this is your descending tract. Now here you can see that this pyramidal tract is coming as a single bunch. But as it will start to pass through the pons, you can see that this bundle is now divided into the multiple parts. Now why it has been divided into the multiple parts? Because in between these bundles, you can see that the pontine fibers are passing. So these transverse fibers which are arising from the pontine nuclei are responsible to separate or split or break these corticospinal fibers into the small bundles. And when you will take the section of these bundles, you are able to see multiple circular areas into the basilar part. So my dear students, you have to keep this thing in mind that these are the multiple bundles, but these bundles are actually the part of pyramidal tract or corticospinal tract. And why you are having these multiple bundles? Because these pyramidal tract fibers are intersection of the transverse fiber. So because of the intersection of the transverse fibers, these transverse fibers break these longitudinal fibers into the multiple bundles. Clear? Now we'll approach the upper part of the pons. Now my dear students, when you will see the upper pons, it is also known as section at the level of trigeminal nerve exit, or it is the section at the level of trigeminal nuclei. So the internal structure of cranial part of the pons, when you will see, is quite very similar to that of the caudal part, except there is a presence of very prominent structure which is known as motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve and principal sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Now here first I will discuss about a small idea of the trigeminal nerve nuclei. You have to understand that there is a one nucleus which is known as principal sensory or chief sensory nucleus. Now below that you will have the spinal nucleus, above that you will have the mesencephalic nucleus. Now these are the three parts of your sensory area of trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal nerve sensory part is having three nucleus. Upper is known as mesencephalic, then chief sensory and spinal nucleus. Now medial to this you will have the motor nucleus. So in this sense there are four nuclei of trigeminal nerve. What are the four nuclei? Mesencephalic nucleus, this is motor nucleus, this is chief sensory or the principal sensory nucleus, and this is spinal nucleus. Clear? Now this spinal nucleus is going downward up to the C1 segment of medulla. So if I am taking the section of medulla, you will find this spinal nucleus at all the levels of medulla. And this is also passing into the lower pons. So if I will taking the section of lower pons, again I will find the spinal nucleus. But as you will approach the upper pons, in upper pons you will find these two nuclei. So in upper pons I will have these two more important nuclei, that means the nucleus which is motor supply of the trigeminal nerve and this chief sensory nucleus. Now why we are not considering this here in terms of the labeling of the section? When you are labeling the section, this section which is passing through the upper pons is known as at the level of trigeminal nuclei. Why? Because these lower part, that means spinal nucleus, is not whole soul nuclei of trigeminal. It is actually the nuclei which is also receiving the sense from other cranial nerves also. So this nuclei is sharing with the other cranial nerve. But the chief sensory and motor nuclei are purely concerned with the trigeminal nerve. So when you are taking the section of upper pons, it is passing through the motor nucleus and chief sensory nucleus of trigeminal nerve. That's why this section of upper pons is also known as section at the level of nuclei of trigeminal nerve. So when you are drawing this upper section, you will come across these two terms. One is the motor nucleus, which is medially, and principal or chief sensory nucleus, which is laterally. So these nucleus of the trigeminal nerve are situated beneath the lateral part of the floor of fourth ventricle. So this is the floor of fourth ventricle, and near the lateral part you will find that there are two nuclei. But my dear students, you have to keep this thing in mind while drawing these nuclei, that motor nucleus is medially placed and chief sensory nucleus is laterally placed. The emerging motor fibers travel anteriorly through the substance of the pons, and they will exit through the anterolateral surface of your pons. Then the important thing is that superior cerebellar peduncle is situated posterolateral to the nuclei of trigeminal nerve. So once you have drawn the motor nucleus and chief sensory nucleus, you have to draw the superior cerebellar peduncle. Now here the important thing which you have to keep in mind, that the middle cerebellar peduncle is a common factor in both the section. We have drawn the middle cerebellar peduncle in lower pons as well as in upper pons. But in lower pons, we draw the inferior cerebellar peduncle. In upper pons, we are drawing superior cerebellar peduncle. The second thing is the trapezoid body. I told you that trapezoid body is smaller in size, but the important thing is that there is a presence of medial lemniscus, and along the medial lemniscus, you will have the three more lemniscus. So from medial to lateral, now there are four lemniscus. So first medial most is the medial lemniscus, then this is the trigeminal lemniscus, then you will have the spinal lemniscus, and most laterally lateral lemniscus. So on midline to laterally, you will find arrangement of the four lemnisci. But in the lower pons, you have only two lemniscus, medial and spinal. Here, other than medial and spinal, you also have trigeminal and lateral lemniscus. So at the end, when you will see this upper part of the pons, this part is also known as the section at the level of trigeminal nuclei. Whenever you are having this word section at the level of trigeminal nuclei, two words always strike in your mind. You have to draw the motor nucleus of trigeminal and main sensory or chief sensory nucleus of trigeminal. Clear? The posterior part is of the floor of fourth ventricle is not much larger, and it is closed by a area is known as superior medullary velum. And here you have to draw the superior cerebellar peduncle, while in the lower part we have drawn the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Facial colliculus is not seen. The base or the basilar part is similar in both the sections. So what are the differences which you have to keep in mind? If you are drawing the upper part, then the grey matter is showing these two characteristic nuclei which I told you, motor and chief sensory or principal sensory nucleus, and the white matter is showing all the four lemnisci. While you are drawing the lower part is showing the 6th, 7th and 8th cranial nerves. And the most important thing is that there are only two lemnisci, while here you will have the four lemnisci. So now, if you will have this image in your mind and this floor of fourth ventricle, it is always easy to draw the sections. Now here you can see that these are the facial colliculus, which is a prominent features of the floor of fourth ventricle. So when I am drawing the section at this level, I am talking about the lower part of the pons. When I am taking the section at this level, I am talking about the upper part of the pons. So when you are drawing the section at the facial colliculus, that means the lower pons, here you can see that you have to draw the facial colliculus. And I told you that facial colliculus is formed because of the internal genu fibers of the facial nerve. The another important thing is that next to this, laterally, these areas are known as vestibular areas. So we have the vestibular nuclei here on both the sides. And next to the vestibular nuclei, you will have the cochlear nuclei. The important thing is that when you are having the sections in this and this section, you will realize that the floor is more broad, and as you will go above, the floor is narrowing. So the narrowing is showing here, and this part is closed in by area is known as superior medullary velar. Clear? So my dear students, whenever you are drawing the sections of the pons, what are the important things which you have to keep in mind? That first, how to draw the outline, then what are the features of the basilar part of the pons, and what are the differences into the tegmentum part of the pons. That means which cranial nerve nuclei are present in the lower pons and which cranial nerve nuclei are present in the images of upper pons. Clear? So this is all for the session. Thank you.